All right, we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to the AllStar MMA live show. We will be recapping UFC Vegas 69. But before we do that, make sure you guys go into the descriptions, download the AllStar app, make your picks on the fights, join the community, win prizes, all of that good stuff. And join me today, of course, one of my favorite guys in the business. Are we? Are we? Are we media? Like, I guess we're media.
Yeah, we're media technically. Yeah. I mean,
But are we journalists? Like that's just always a weird thing to me, you know what I mean? And we'll talk about this later on in the show just to give you guys a little bit of a preview. We'll get into like media and journalism and all of that stuff. We'll give our perspectives on that because it has come up, the conflict of interest in fighting, not just with reporters or journalists, but with as well as fighters and retired fighters and whatnot. So we'll get into that stuff. Patrick is a guy that is well versed in that, and he has a lot of knowledge and perspective that I don't have. I'm a caveman, so I just give you guys what I think and not much filtered through it. Let's get into the main event of this show, man. UFC Vegas 69. It was a main event, like multiple opponent changes for Erin Blanchfield, and she accepted them all. She was just like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. I don't give a fuck. Like, give me somebody, give me a big name, give me a step up in competition. And man, she showed out, right? She came in and she banged it out in the first round. I was just like, and she was clipping Andrade with the right head a few times, cocking that head back a little bit. I mean, it didn't seem like there was much power because she ate those punches pretty well, but she was clipping her, right? It was a pretty even stand-up battle on the feet. Andrade looked like she did a little bit more damage, but that second round came and Blanchfield was like, I don't think I want to do that anymore. Let's take it to the ground. And once it got to the ground, Andrade looked like she was lost and just gave up the neck. You know what I mean? I don't want to say that about fighters, but it just seemed like she just gave up the neck, and Blanchfield got the tap pretty quick. What did you think, Patrick, about that fight, the performance, and the step up in competition?
yeah, no, I thought the most surprising thing to me was how good Blanchfield looked on the feet, right? She was clipping Andrade. A couple times it looked like the power shots, they didn't necessarily really hurt Andrade, but a couple of them buckled her, or at least stung her enough that she seemed to, back off a little bit or be a little bit more timid and more protective of just leaving her chin out there. And then, yeah, once it got to the ground, it's one of those things where Blanchfield looks so smooth, but at the same time, Andrade definitely just was like, I'm just going to get up and not, try and protect anything. And Blanchfield took advantage. It's a weird fight for me because one thing I keep seeing everywhere is like, oh, Blanchfield beat, the bigger, stronger Andrade. If you look at the fight, no, Blanchfield, it looks like a size up compared to Andrade. Like that's step one is like Blanchfield looked like an entire like mini weight class up over Andrade. And then secondly, like again, it was a beautiful performance and it's not anything to take away from Blanchfield. I'm excited to see her fight for the title or whatever, number one contender fight. That's the only two options for her at this point. But Andrade also just kind of went in there brawling. And then, like you said, kind of did give up the neck. And her post fight, I don't know how to take her post fight comments. I don't know if you saw those where she's like, I wasn't even really in there to win. I was just looking to make money and I tripled my contract by taking this fight short notice. And it's like, okay, like how much of that is true? How much of that is not? I have no idea. I know she wants to go back down to straw weight. Great. But I mean, no matter what, it's still impressive that Blanchfield is now the only person to stop Andrade at 125, not named Shevchenko, right? It was an awesome first round, great second round too from Blanchfield. It's just a weird fight. Like the whole, like you said, so many opponent changes. This comes together like a week and a half, if that. Like, all right, it's a weird situation.
Yeah, I understand that Andrade wanted to take this fight so to renegotiate her contract and get more money and get paid. Of course, we've heard many things in the past about her struggles with, you know, money and getting the best contract from the UFC, and her, you know, relying on OnlyFans. And, you know, it's something that really bothers me because she's been a top 15 fighter in multiple weight classes. I think 3 different weight classes.
3.
For the last, I don't even know how many years. And she's still talking about she doesn't get paid enough and she's trying to get a pay bump. And it's just sad that she has to kind of like put that out there. And she took this short notice fight. It's crazy because heading into the fight, she beat Chukagian, who is one of the best flyweights out there. She beat Cynthia Calvillo and she beat Lauren Murphy, which I felt like Lauren Murphy was probably the best win out of all of those. And I feel like all of those wins, she had a full camp. You know what I mean? She's going into all of those fights as a smaller female, but she had a full camp to prepare, strategize, you know, get in certain positions where her opponent is strong, escape out of those positions, drill all that stuff. I think that's so important as a fighter, you know what I mean? Because preparation, man. You see a lot of these fighters that do camps and fight. They don't take short notice fights. Justin Gaethje, when's the last time you saw him take a short notice fight? Never, because he knows that he cannot risk losing. You know what I mean? He's an entertaining fighter and his fighting style is risky, but he understands like what he needs to do when he gets in there and he gets into tough spots. He knows how to escape those spots. He knows what his opponent's strengths are, and you got a head coach that's guiding you through all of that process, right? This one, a week and a half, a week, there's no time. You're just going in to cut weight, and then you're going out there to fight. And sometimes it works out. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it does. We've seen it work out for many fighters. But Blanchfield, she's got that equalizer. Like, once she gets to the ground, man, she's just so tough. And like you said, she was like the supersized version of Andrade. You know what I mean? Everybody was like, Andrade. I think people think Andrade is much bigger than she actually is. Just because the fighting style she has, right, Pat? Like, it's I think people are clouded. Their judgment is clouded by that. And I was clouded by it as well heading into the fight. I was like, yeah, she beat Calvillo. She beat, you know, she's so powerful. She's going to lift up, you know, Blanchfield. And we kind of like glossed over Blanchfield's like grappling abilities. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure her wrestling defense is really good as well. And Andrade never even got close to like getting close to a takedown or anything like that, right? She got taken down and overpowered and kind of like just laid there. Like, once she got taken down and she went right to side control, she just like laid there against the cage, like, okay, is it going to be over anytime soon? Like, you know, I might have like dinner reservations, you know what I mean? Like, I got paid for this fight, so, you know, I might have to go get some barbecue or something like that, some Korean barbecue. I don't know, but that's what it felt like. And Blanchfield, man, she took advantage of that. And in this game, if you don't take advantage of your spots, you know, 2-3 losses, people forget about you. Look at Dominic Reyes, man. Like, he was in a very good spot, and you know, you didn't take advantage of those spots that you had, and now where's Dominic Reyes? Like, he's on a 3-fight losing streak. People are starting to give up on him. So Blanchfield, she's a young star. I don't think she has that, like, I don't know, they call her cold-blooded, but does she have that it factor though, like Valentina Shevchenko?
I mean, she could, right? Like, she hasn't had a lot of opportunity to be on the mic or do like, right? And when she has, she's just kind of been like, all right, I'm just a girl that does MMA, right? And I mean, that's not true. She's got a personality, but I don't know that she has the same type of it factor. And it's such a weird thing because, right? Like, I mean, I've been watching Blanchfield since Invicta. Like, I always knew she was going to be a hot prospect and do really well. This is one of those weird situations where it eerily reminds me of Cody Garbrandt, right? Like, dude came up out of nowhere, beat number 10 or 11, ends up fighting Cruz, wins, like, styles on him, wins the belt, and then just has loss after loss after loss. And I'm not saying that's what's happening with Blanchfield, right? She could easily stay on top of the division, but the way people are hyping her up, like, being like, this is like the new champ. Like, even if like it'll either be she beats Valentina or once Valentina retires, she'll be like, I don't know. I feel like we got to see more, and we it's just a weird scenario. This is the whole thing about rankings too, right? Because Andrade was number 2, took a short notice fight and lost, she instantly bypasses everyone else in the division. And Andrade was her only real test, right? Molly McCann, Sarah Alpar, those are not tests those are basic entry level fights for somebody like Blanchfield. This was her only real test. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be interesting. And again, Andrade does seem bigger. I think because she seems bigger at strawweight some of the time, right? But like at flyweight, yeah, she's usually not bigger. And Valentina's going to be bigger. It's going to be interesting. And I don't know how well that's going to sell or the hype. I haven't seen a ton of movement on metrics that make me think that Blanchfield is a real like needle mover right now. Doesn't mean she can't be, but this whole scenario to me, this whole card was so weird. It's surreal in so many ways, right? Like, yeah.
Blanchfield, you know, she's definitely skilled, and she went in there and beat a former champ, a strawweight champ, and Andrade she is big and powerful for the strawweight division. Whenever we seen her fight against like another flyweight, she didn't look very big. You know what I mean? She's powerful. Yes, she can throw hammers, and she's one of my favorite fighters to watch in the like out of all the divisions, out of all the UFC, because she puts it all out there. And I just saw a statistic on Twitter someone put up that this is her 5th time being stopped in the UFC. That's the most out of any female fighter in the history of the UFC. So it just shows you like she goes in there and she puts it all out there. Either she's kill or be killed, and it's very rare a kill or be killed fighter becomes a champ. Yeah. Not many out there kill or be killed like become a champ, unless like the UFC is massaging their way. And Andrade has had a rough road to like becoming a champion. It hasn't been easy for her, right? And but Blanchfield, she has a high ceiling. You know what I mean? She went in there and she really put it on the line in that first round, went punch for punch, and was doing really well against Andrade. And I don't know, she got clipped a couple times. You know, I think she was grabbing for the clinch. You know, one time she got punched by Andrade, so she felt the power. And she probably got some good corner advice between rounds, and then she went into the second round and said, "All right, let's get it to the ground and use your strength against Andrade." And yeah, it's weird, man. This is a weird card, and let's get into this comment. Roth Window Cleaning Services. Roth, we're looking for sponsors, man. Get down. Andrade is big and powerful. If one of those shots landed on Erin, it would have been over. I can't disagree with that. No need to say Andrade isn't that big. Well, Andrade isn't that big for flyweight division. If you've seen, did you watch the fight, Roth? You saw them stand next to each other. Like there was a big difference, right? Erin had the technique to sub her. That's all. She does have the technique. We're not saying she doesn't have the technique, but Andrade, once it got to the ground, yeah, it doesn't seem like she was ready for anything. And sometimes, man, these fighters, you don't know what they're preparing. You don't know how they're training outside of camp. We just saw Cyril Gahn tell everybody on an interview, take it for what it's worth, that he doesn't even train for fights unless he got a fight signed, and he doesn't even wrestle unless he's facing a wrestler or like wrestle in the camp. Like, do you believe that or not? I don't know. If it's true, that's concerning, and put the house on Jones. Because if Jones saw that,
but is Jones doing anything different though? Jones was notorious for like I think it makes it kind of perfect because he's the one that's also notorious being like, oh yeah, Gus, when I fought you the first time, I was doing coke and like trade for a week. It's like, all right, just have these two guys that don't trade fight each other. Why not? Like,
but what fighter doesn't do coke? You know what I mean? It's just like it seems like it's just a prerequisite to being an animal like that, right? So Erin Blanchfield, do you think she should fight the winner of Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko?
I think so. I mean, it's one of those things where again, she got a win over a former title contender and a former strawweight champ. And Andrade is not an easy out, even if it was short notice. And who else is Valentina going to fight at this point, right? Valentina's cleared out the division mostly. This would be the first time in a while that, and this is again providing Valentina wins. If Grasso gets it done, then you got to run that back and have Blanchfield fight somebody else. Just because Valentina's been champ forever. But otherwise, if Valentina wins, there's almost no one else for her to fight that makes a lot of sense. Like Blanchfield would versus Valentina is the first time I'd be excited for a Valentina defense in quite a while. Like, not taking anything away from what Grasso's done to get here, but I'm expecting that to kind of go pretty much a decision or a ground and pound TKO for Valentina, right? It's just it's one of those things. They've cleared out the division. You might as well at this point let Blanchfield get a shot at it. I mean, it's going to be Valentina's newest and toughest test probably. So why not?
The UFC, man, it's very apparent and clear that they love Valentina Shevchenko. She is a media darling. She flies around the world. She's like James Bond in many aspects of the UFC. She's always in a different country training with all different people. She's a very good ambassador, let's say, for the UFC. She speaks multiple languages. She represents multiple countries. They would want her to continue fighting and defending that title and winning. That's what they want. That's the business that they're going to be in, right? And Mexico is like a new, I don't want to say new location, but it's a location, and Central America is a location where the UFC kind of wants to blow up in now, especially with the PI and with Mexican champions. Like Yair is the champion now, Moreno's a champion. They're giving Grasso. You could have your views on, like, does she deserve that title shot? But sometimes, like in the case of Zhang Wei Li, it all depends on business. Like, do they want to make money in a certain region, right? Or a certain demographic. And if you look at demographic like a Sean O'Malley, you know, I mean, that's a guy that has a certain demographic for him that's pushing him, right? But yeah, for like title challengers, they just want Valentina to fight people that they could take advantage of. And if like, let's say if Grasso wins, that's great for the UFC as well, because now they got another Mexican champ. They got another champ from that region that they could maybe make money by doing another massive pay-per-view in Mexico City, right? It's all about money. And people don't, I always tell people, man, is now the UFC is about money. They don't give a fuck about the fighters. They don't give a shit about the fighters. The decisions that they're making right now, it's not about the fighters. It's about money, right, Pat?
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. I want to touch on something you said because I think it's very important to point it out, and you worded it perfectly, right? Valentina is an ambassador for the brand or the UFC. That she's not a needle mover in the sense of she's not, going to make a ton of pay-per-view buys be sold or anything like that. I mean, really, there have been very few women, unfortunately, outside of Rousey and Cyborg, who have really moved the needle in a main event spot. Valentina isn't one of them. But what she is great at is, again, being an ambassador for the sport, going to multiple countries and speaking multiple languages, presented as, this, beautiful debutante woman who also knows how to fight, a female James Bond. That's how they market her. It's perfect for them to start moving into regions that they want to and have her as flyweight champ. And you're exactly right too with Grasso, where they're definitely making a move right now, trying to get into both, Central America, Mexico, South America. That's a new frontier for them. And so with Moreno as champ, they'd love to see Grasso as champ too. It's always about the money. I mean, if it's been apparent it's about the money beforehand, if you looked kind of like before Endeavor bought them, if you looked between some of the lines, ever since Endeavor bought them, it's been just very clear cut. I mean, speaking of Andrade, right? They made her first title defense be in China against Wei Li, who at the time his best win in the UFC had been, I believe, Tisha Torres, right? Who was like ranked number 10, another huge push. They're making a champ fly across the world to go defend her belt for the very first time after, like you said, she's been winning in multiple weight classes, all that other stuff. And she has to go do this. And they did that because they were hoping Wei Li would win. Wei Li won. And the very next day, they renegotiated the media rights with China to get double what they were originally getting with Wei Li as champ. That's
big.
It's huge. It's always about the money. Every single decision is about the money.
I was there cage side for that fight, man, live in Shenzhen. It was an incredible moment, dude. Like, Jessica Andrade, she's loved, dude, like, by fans. Like, even in China, after that fight was over, nobody booed her. When she was outside the cage, all the Chinese fans were trying to take pictures with her. You know what I mean? She was accepting of all of that. You know what I mean? She's actually a pretty decent ambassador, man. I wish they would pay her. a lot of money, Jessica
Dude,
Andrade.
it's not. I mean, if she truly tripled up on her contract for this fight, then yeah, good on her, man. Like that's awesome. And yeah, it's nuts to me. She's talking about how she's struggling for money. When wait, are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, you froze for a minute. But, it's crazy that she's talking about struggling for money when she's a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? There's no way she doesn't get into the Hall of Fame, given everything she's accomplished as a strawweight champion, wins at 135, like flyweight contender. It's nuts. That's it's it's the UFC, man. It is all about the money. You nail on the head there.
Yeah. Well, from time to time, I'll freeze because I think, the UFC is, they're trying to do some funny stuff. Whenever we're talking about them, they try to do some funny things. You know what I mean? Yeah. So going back to like Erin getting a title shot, I think she should get it. You know what I mean? I think this win like showed us that she's ready for the spotlight. Is she ready to become a champion? I don't know. In her eyes, she is. You know what I mean? If you're in the UFC and you're fighting top 15 competition, you think you're going to become the champion. You want the bigger fights. You don't want to dodge anybody, especially if they're going to line you up for a title shot. It looks like that's what they're doing. I don't think they really want a Grasso against Blanchfield, though. I don't think that's the fight that they want.
Probably not, but I mean, it depends. If you do Grasso versus
in
Mexico, yeah, then that's what they would do. If Grasso wins, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happens. But I also think they'll do, if Grasso wins, they've got to give Valentina a rematch, right? Like she's been the only flyweight champ.
Yeah.
Right. Or no, I forgot about Nico. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, she's been the longest reigning flyweight champ. We'll put it that way.
Nico, talk about bad circumstances, right, on her part and the UFC's as well. You know what I mean? But Valentina slides right in at the perfect moment. It says, "Hey, your ambassador is here.
Yeah,
let's get the train rocking." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with that, Grasso, get her to the fight. Valentina wins, great. If Grasso wins, great. They get the rematch. They probably want a trilogy, to be honest with you, with that one. You know what I mean? Because then they could go back states. You could go to Europe with that. You could go to Mexico City, somewhere in Mexico with it. You know what I mean? And make tons of money. And Blanchfield's waiting in the wings, she's the girl next door, the American. You know what I mean? Like there's always good. It's always good to have an American in the mix. How many Americans are really in the mix nowadays? In title spots, you know what I mean? It seems like
isn't it like
not many.
Not
many, right?
I'm trying to think who's an American champion right now. Aljo, and then is that it?
Yeah, but does America support Aljo though? Like he's like one of the guys that they don't really. Aljo's an incredible talent, man. He's like shut a lot of people up with what he's done. You know what I mean? Like really, like everybody underestimated him. There's so many champions that come in and they're underestimated, and we're probably underestimating Erin Blanchfield as well. You know what I mean? And she's gonna go in there and take down Valentina and choke her out too, just the way she did to Andrade. Who knows? We don't know until she steps in there. But we gotta wait for Valentina and Grasso, which I think they fight in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
and it's like if Valentina wins, I could see them like booking that. If that fight's quick, like Valentina goes in there and finishes Grasso, they book Erin Blanchfield right away. You know what I mean? Like another pay-per-view, because they need like title fights, man. Like what are they doing with the flyweight? Flyweights, what is it? Men's flyweight. Who's the next challenger for that? They don't even know yet. You know what I mean? So they need to book fights real fast. Maybe Yair and Grasso. Who knows, man? Who knows what's going on with them? But yeah, it's interesting, man. This show was interesting. It's very rare when the prelims are 10 times better in entertainment. Like entertainment-wise, the prelims are 10 times better than the main card. It's very rare we see that, but that's what happened, right? We had Nazim Sadikov versus Evan Elder. That was just an insane fight, you know what I mean? And if you look at the scorecards, Evan Elder was winning on all the scorecards heading into the third, and then he gets cut. And let's talk about that cut, right? It's above the eye. We know that, you know what I mean? It's bleeding. But then we saw like weeks ago where RoboCop had a bazooka tube hole in the middle of his head, and the doctor was just like, "Oh, that's fine." Is it just about blood? Like, if you're getting blood in your eyes, then we're gonna stop the fight? That's what it seems like, right?
I mean, yeah, I'm assuming that there's some medical reason, right? Like where certain cuts are more dangerous than others, and they're supposed to know. But I also think it could very well just be like doctors just with complete differences of what they think. It's so weird to me. I don't know enough about the medical profession to say like, oh, that definitely should have been stopped versus not on those two cuts. But it's weird to me that like exactly what you're saying, where RoboCop had that huge chunk, just is like okay, and then Elder had a cut and it was bad, but they didn't even try to like wipe it away or like put it together. They just instantly called it, right? And it's like, well, it was early enough in the round. I guess it wasn't going to be to the end of the round where they could try and do something to put it together. But maybe because it's just near the eye, and you don't want to mess with eye shit. Like I don't know. Like it's
maybe James Krause knows the doctor and he has some money on it. I don't know. That was everything speculated like that, right? Everything speculated like that. But it kind of sucks for Elder, you know what I mean? Because he was winning the fight. If he survived that round, he would have won the fight. Clearly, I don't care like what you thought about the rounds before that, because I thought it was a pretty even fight. It was hard to judge both rounds, so it was pretty much 1-1 in my eyes. You know what I mean? I don't know which 1-1 it would be, because both those guys rocked each other, I believe, in both rounds, and it was just an insane fight. It's weird, man. Sometimes these doctors, they step in and they'll stop a fight for a nasty cut, but then the doctors won't stop a fight for different stuff. Like I don't understand, man.
It's similar to refs, right? Like they're different people with different expertise. Like, and I'm not.
But should it be? Should it be different?
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. But
yeah, we gotta. Yeah, it's a whole nother can of worms. But man, Evan Elder, because of this, he came into the UFC undefeated. Now he's sitting on 2 straight losses with the UFC. Yeah, he got a fat $50,000 bonus check, but you know what I mean? Like he's sitting on 2 losses now. You know what I mean? Like how it sucks, man. His next fight is very, very important for him, if they even give it to him. Nowadays, the UFC is cutting guys after 1-2 fights.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think because he got fight of the night, they'll probably give him a third shot, right? And he was up like, but I mean, if he had some of the other types of fights was on the main card,
let's do it. William Knight. I mean, let's do it. What do you think? Come on, man.
Willie. Oh my God. Dude, that was a lot of people hated it. I understand why. I thought it was hilarious. Like that whole situation was just kind of a like what it looked like a video game, a spamming video game character, like of just leg kick over and over. And William just tried to like lift his leg up to not get kicked. He threw 8 strikes. There's no way he doesn't get cut. The official UFC account was dunking on him with memes during the fight. That's how bad he did.
I don't know what was going on, man. That must have been all mental, you know?
Yeah, he said he posted today that it was like he froze up and he apologized for it. But yeah, I mean, it's like it's either a mental block, like he said, or like I've seen some other people, if you want to go down that conspiracy route, that like betting on stuff, right? I don't know, but it just like it's so wild to me in terms of that he stood in the cage and basically just let his leg get destroyed for 15 minutes straight.
And the thing is, like, he had a lot of like emotions heading into the fight as well. Like I interviewed him about like what was going on after that last fight, and he said a lot of people were fucking with him. A lot of people fucked with him in his personal life, and fans and MMA bettors, and people that just watch the sport. They want to just shit on people for performances, and they did for this one as well. And he thought like this year is going to be my year of redemption. You know what I mean? And because there's all those allegations, people, even like more plates, more dates. They've never done anything about like MMA fighters, well, famous ones, but not guys that are coming up, about their physiques. And he's been attacked about that. And I kind of feel for him, you know what I mean? Because I've interviewed him for like pretty much every UFC fight, or most of them, and you could see that kind of crack him a little bit. You know what I mean? And he always has a chip on his shoulder. And he must have had a lot of pressure on himself as well, because maybe this was something that he had to win. He had to win this fight. And maybe that's why he froze up, because he didn't want to make a mistake. And then 15 minutes of leg kicks, man. Marcin did a great job. You know, I'm pretty sure so many people betted on Knight because they expected Knight to just blast out the gate and throw hammers at and Marcin and knock him out. And that's what I thought was going to happen as well. But that's the thing about fighting, man. You never know what's going to happen. Imagine if that fight was in an arena. That was in the Apex. There's nobody really there. Imagine in the arena. Imagine the boos.
Dude, I've been exactly in one arena fight that I doubt will be topped in terms of how bad it was, and boos and just the crowd going wild. And that was, that's nuts. He's getting death threats. Was 226 Lewis versus Ngannou. And let me tell you, man, it was awful. The amount of boos, people got their cell phones out and were doing like the slow wave like you do during like concerts, right? When they play slow songs. Dude, I thought the crowd was going to straight up throw like beer bottles and shit into the everyone hated that fight. That would have been a similar reaction to this. I mean, just leg kicks nonstop. If I paid to go to an arena show and this was there, I would be very unhappy.
Most people that are at the fights, they're not, I don't know. I don't think that they're hardcore fans. I think most people that are at the fights, it's kind of like an event for them, you know. Oh, the UFC's in town, you know. Hey buddies, let's get some tickets, let's get drunk and enjoy the fights. And those people can get out of character more than anyone, right? And especially if you're betting on the fights. I think MMA gambling has kind of ruined MMA fandom as well. You know what I mean? Like, people are not just fans. Like, I've never really officially gambled on a fight. I'll make picks and things like that, but not officially gamble on like these websites and you know, put up big money. Because think about it. Let's say you put $1,000 on Will Knight and you lost $1,000, and that's like half your paycheck, right? Number one, you're a fucking idiot if you're betting half your paycheck on a fight.
On William Knight.
On any fight.
I mean, I don't like William Knight a lot, but just half a paycheck on William Knight in general is a bad call.
Exactly.
Any unranked light heavyweight or heavy, it should be better.
Exactly. And those are the guys, those are the type of guys that are going to get in your DMs, that are going to get in your posts and just write the nastiest things about you. But vice versa, if you won the fight, those are the guys in your DMs and your posts congratulating you and loving you. You know what I mean? You see those videos online nowadays, right? Of fans, like even we just had the Super Bowl when the Eagles lost, right? You saw some fucking crazy reactions by fans at home, right? Just throwing their TVs across the room and like punching the TV. And like, I've never been that hardcore. Have you ever been that hardcore for like sports?
I think I was that hardcore once when I was like 8 years old. Like, I think when I was 8, I threw something at a TV or on the ground and broke something. That was like mine. It's like, all right. But no, seriously, like I do not understand these grown men and women, like literally getting so angry about sports teams that they are like throwing stuff and just getting mad. And like I've done like a fantasy league with my friends before where I get like pissed off that something happens and I'm like, man, I hate that I lost, but like that's it. Like it's like, oh, I got pissed off somebody, like I was winning this fight, like maybe I had Evan Elder, I thought I was going to win, suddenly come back, it's like, oh, like I think one time fantasy season I had Korean Zombie against Yair and I was like, well, would have won except for the last second thing. Sure, you get frustrated, but like the reaction, like I would never like, first of all, I would never blame a fighter, right? Like it's not like TKZ wanted to get knocked out or that William Knight wanted to stand there and have this performance. Like he's almost certainly going to get cut after this. There's no way he wanted this to happen. Second of all, like who am I to judge this dude? Like I don't understand the audacity of some people that think that it's okay to break stuff or to like send death threats apparently to a fighter, or like because they lost money. It's like, you, dude, what? Like it's
all about money. It's about
Oh
money.
yeah.
Like to me, whenever someone like is outraged like that, it's about money. It reminds me of that movie Rampage. Did you ever see that movie Rampage where the guy like gets in all the like the SWAT gear and just goes around and kills everybody in the town? It's not
No.
even for the purpose of like robbing anything or stealing or anything. It's just like he was just rampage. Like he just went crazy and probably that's what I see some sports bettor eventually doing to themselves or somebody else. Like it's got to that point, like fandom and outrage for sports and gambling. And I think that's why they were so hesitant to legalize gambling in a lot of places, is because people go crazy. You know what I mean? Like gambling is illegal in Korea, like illegal. But you know how the government works. They have like their little, oh, we'll have our little lotteries, and oh, we got
Right.
this casino in the on the coast that the citizens can go to gamble, but that's the only casino in the country. And who owns the casino? The government.
Right.
And this is the most money making entity the government has, is that casino. People go to that casino and lose their life. Like there's people sleeping on the street near the casino. You know what I mean? Like
Gee.
homelessness is not that prevalent in Korea, but there's a lot of homelessness over there because people go over there and just gamble
Yeah.
everything away, right? And then the government's like okay with that, but they don't want to put, it's like that's why I was like, if you, governments are fucking stupid. You know what I mean? They're just idiots. You know what I mean? Like any entity. But yeah, William Knight, man, that's shitty to see. Um, Zach, the co-main event, Zach Puaga, he goes in there, gets the unanimous decision. That was just a smart move. You know what I mean? Like Zach, I interviewed him as well, and he told me he told me what he was gonna do exactly to Jordan Wright, and he went in there and did it. He said, "I'm not going in there for fight of the night. I'm going in there to win, and I know how I'm gonna beat Jordan Wright." And this is how I'm going to be. I'm going to put my face in his chest. And that's what he did. He put his face in his
Yeah.
chest, clinched him, elbowed him, and cut him. And Jordan Wright, he kind of froze as well in that fight. He didn't look like,
Yeah, he
because
looked like
everybody's like,
he was looking at himself on the screen so much. It's like, what are you doing, man? Like,
and he
you
was like
need to
raising
get
his hand like he
yeah.
won the rounds. You know what I mean? Like, are you not fooling anybody, man? The judges are not that fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
Well, and like it was an interesting fight to me because Jordan Wright's a quick start, right? Like that was the first time he ever went to the third round. Like he either gets knocked out or he knocks out or submits quick. Like that's pretty much his MO. And this was also a scenario where I thought Mark Smith did a terrible job with the low blow, where then he gave the position back to Zach, where it's like, dude, accidental or not, that's a foul. You don't give back the position. And I wonder if that would have made a difference. Probably not. Like, probably would have given Wright a little bit more opportunity to be explosive. But then I assume Zach would have done the same thing because Wright just kind of stood there. And yeah, I mean, again, not exciting, but he gets his win bonus. And I mean, he's not doing himself favors with the brass, but
No.
I mean, he probably was pissed he lost to Usman, so he figured he had to get a win. It's like, okay, like
Yeah, well, he told me on the interview. He said, "I'm on that long Ultimate Fighter contract. I gotta burn that contract
yeah,
out. I gotta fight as much as I can. I gotta win so I could re-up." And I think fighters are starting to get a little bit smarter about that as well. You know what I mean? They're not thinking like, "Oh, I'm in the UFC." Like, think about it like this. People are always talking about, "Oh, is this fighter UFC level?" And I think the level is like there's no such thing as UFC level now. It's just like there's fighters that are ready at 4 fights to compete against the best in the world, and there's fighters that are ready at 14 fights or 24 fights. We don't know, but there's no like I don't think UFC level anymore. The UFC is just signing who they want to sign. Do you agree?
yeah. I mean, I think so. I think there's a tier, right, of pro that I would say is probably um, the upper echelon of UFC has the most, right? Like I would still say they've kind of, it definitely has dropped a little bit, like you're saying, where they used to hold all of the best fighters or try and hold all of the best fighters for as long as possible. They've kind of started to let go of that with the antitrust suit, and also the fact they've built their brand enough they don't need it anymore. Because you still have people, right? You have people going around saying you had Stephen A. Smith or whatever saying like people who train UFC. It's like, okay, like they've won the brand war for the casual fan. And so looking at where they are now, it's part of why they keep bringing in all these Dana White Contender Series guys, right? It's to keep costs down. Like that's all business. It's how can we cut costs? How can we cut costs? Especially with how levered up Endeavor is. They have 40% of their debt is variable interest rates. So as the Fed keeps jacking up rates, that keeps, costing Endeavor more and more money. So they're trying to figure out, where could I cut costs? Well, of course, I can get rid of all these fighters that were maybe like 14 and 15 or like bigger names like Anthony Pettis, but they're way past their prime and they can maybe gatekeep and maybe not. But cut all of them and let's bring in all these Dana White Contender Series guys or tough guys that are making 10K or 12K for 5 fights. And so when they start doing that, suddenly it becomes, some of these guys have no business being anywhere near the upper part of the divisions and could go and be competitive against some of the Bellator prelims guys or some of the PFL. PFL, I would say, is doing a better job raising their level too, but from like original PFL, right? Some of those guys, like it's a scenario where they are purposefully sacrificing that actual, top level talent for cost at this point. And that's it's definitely diminishing the idea that fighters once had when they look over and they see somebody like PFL or Bellator or One who are all making bigger moves. And they're saying, well, like, maybe I'll just go get paid more. And like, I mean, why would you not, if you're a top level gatekeeper in the UFC, right? That like can't quite get a belt, but is up in like 10 to 5 range in rankings. Why would you not go to PFL and try and win $1 million? Like, or try and get in the pay-per-view division, right? Like, why would you not do that? It's wild to me, but it's, who was it that just won last year's season, who got cut from the UFC and then he wins $1 million.
Well, they didn't get cut. Did he get cut? I think maybe he just didn't sign with the UFC. Brendan Loughnane.
No, Brendan Loughnane never got signed. No, but I'm thinking of Antonio Carlos Jr.
Oh yeah, that was the year before.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago.
Tom, what is it? Wilkinson.
Yeah,
he
Tom
was
Wilkinson.
released.
Yeah,
he was released by UFC. He goes over there, wins $1 million. If I'm a young fighter, I'm trying to fight for the PFL, to be honest with you, because the UFC is going to be there. If you go in there and win the $1 million, and maybe your contract is up to that point of like, okay, this season you win $1 million. That's how talented you are, right? And you cut your teeth there, maybe against a little bit lower, because the UFC, once they see something in you, they want to push you as far as they can and squeeze as much as they can out of you, right? If you're not smart about it. And PFL, it's structured, right? It's like you fight this guy, you fight this guy, you fight this guy, and you win $1 million. If you could get that base and get that money and then elevate your training situation, your coaching staff, like stuff like that, and then you go to the UFC. Look at Felipe Lins. He won $1 million, and then he goes to the UFC. He's not getting paid as much, but now he has that financial comfortability, right? That he can go and like invest in himself. And he just had a great performance against OSP, man. Like he seemed like a guy that's not really stressed out about like money. You know what I mean? Like he just, what do you do with OSP? Let's move on to this. What do you do with OSP? He's 39 years old and he just didn't look like himself.
No, you either give him a retirement fight or you cut him. Like it's time. I was a big fan of OSP back in the day. I'm glad he got that fight against Jones. Like, I was happy for him there, but ever since he started fighting up at heavyweight and then he came back down, like he's been, he just hasn't looked like himself. I think you give him, he's had enough of a name, right? Like that's another thing the UFC tends to do is they'll let you go on crazy losing streaks if you're a name that can help propel younger fighters, as long as you're willing to gatekeep. Even Anthony Pettis said, like, UFC was willing to re-sign me for a little bit less money or about the same, but I would have had to fight a lot of like unranked guys, wouldn't let me go for the belts. Pretty much like, nope, you're going to be fighting these guys. Andrei Arlovsky, he understood very, very clearly once he lost to Overeem and kind of fell down the rankings. He's gatekeeping. He's making an insane amount of money doing it. He's a great ambassador for the sport. He's fine with it. If people are okay with that role, UFC will keep them because it's he just beat OSP, even though it's like, yeah, OSP hasn't looked good for a long time, but yeah, it's a name, I guess, right? I mean, look at Reyes getting the title shot against John Jones, Dominic Reyes, right? He beat Chris Weidman, who had never fought at light heavyweight and had been on a terrible losing streak, but everybody's like, well, he beat Weidman so clean. It's like,
former champ.
You guys? Yeah, former champ. Exactly. What are you talking about? Like, I think it's
OSP fought for the title. He went close to. He went to decision in the broadcast. They mentioned he went to decision with John Jones, right?
Yeah.
He fought with the broken arm. You know, like these things carry you to a certain point. You know what I mean? And OSP's kind of living that, right? He's living that really, really far. And how many Strikeforce guys are still fighting in the UFC? He's like one of the lasting members, right, of the Strikeforce days. You know what I mean? I didn't expect
Chandler,
him.
right?
Chandler, I don't think he wasn't. He's Bellator. He's been Bellator the whole time.
No, he was Bellator. I thought so.
I don't know. I don't remember.
I swear I looked it up one time. I'll look it up now while we keep.
But yeah, but there's not many guys, right, that are just because if you did fight in Strikeforce, you are up there in age. It's like Nick Diaz.
Yeah.
He's not a young buck, right? He fought, and Robbie Lawler, another guy.
Yeah.
He's up there in age now, right? These guys are all from the Strikeforce days. There's not a guy that's from Strikeforce days that are still in the UFC that are just like fighting at a top 15 level. I say bring back Sam Alvey and have him fight OSP.
Yeah, I mean, might as well, right? Chandler did fight in Strikeforce twice. It was his second and third fight ever. His second and third fight pro fight. So technically, but I mean, yeah, I mean, he's a rare exception, right? That's not. And then he went to Bellator. Like, yeah, anyone that was in the prime of Strikeforce, right? Like, yeah, they're not fighting at high levels anymore. And I mean, they're older. It's, you know,
we just seen Fader retire. Verdum is like semi-retired. It seems like we don't know what the PFL is doing with him. He doesn't seem like he's satisfied with his situation over there. Yeah, so it's another guy that's been around for forever, and he's saying he's going to be around forever. And I think the UFC is going to keep him around is Jim Miller. You know what I mean? He's always in entertaining fights, and he faced off against Hernandez. I don't understand why Hernandez wants to go back to featherweight. Like, he talked about his dick not working when he's cutting down the featherweight, and it's like, isn't that the biggest concern of your life? Or
I mean, it's definitely
you just put that in the back seat, like rear view mirror. My dick doesn't work. It's okay. Like, we need to fight.
Well, and like, I mean, Miller was tagging Hernandez a little bit too, right? Like, if you, this is why, like, when Cody Garbrandt decided he wanted to go down to flyweight after getting knocked out multiple times at bantamweight, I was like, all right, this is easy money on Garbrandt getting knocked out. Like, I think Hernandez the same situation. Like, if you're gonna cut and have all those issues, your chin is where. How far do you think you're gonna get at featherweight when you have? Like, you're never going to get the belt if you've got Volkanovski, Holloway. You've got so many killers. Arnold, it's arguably the worst division to be in right now is featherweight. Why would you want to go back to that? But, you know, it's
very odd. But Jim Miller, man, I got all the respect for Jim Miller. The guy is, I don't want to say he's a legend because he's not. You know, people want to throw the word legend around so easily, right? This guy's a legend. That guy's a legend. You know, Diego Sanchez is a legend. It's like, come on. Come on, son.
Depends on your definition of legend, though. Like, because I will say, if he ends up fighting at UFC 300, he's the only guy to ever fight at UFC 100, 200, and 300. Like, I mean, that's, I don't know. Like, I would say it's, I view it the same way as like Hall of Famers in football or basketball, baseball, or whatever, right? You have the guys that are like the guys, right? Like, but then you still
those are the legends.
Those, okay, all right. If that's what you classify as legend, then that's fine. That's all right. But I mean, like, I understand when some people are just talking about notable fighters throughout the entire history of the sport, right? Like, same with basketball or baseball. There are some guys that didn't have like the best records or the best stats, but they're one of the few people that stand out of a wave of, like, I know people that would say anyone that makes it a Hall of Fame is at least some sort of legend, right? Like, I mean, it's arguable. It's
but you know, the UFC Hall of Fame is shit. So
Well,
You
yeah, I
can't,
mean that's
you
yeah,
know,
you can't really do
there's
that with the UFC. That's
yeah,
true.
the
That's
UFC is like they don't even have Anderson Silva in there, and that guy is a legend. Like
yeah.
we
Oh, he'll
talk
be
about
there.
legend,
There's no
whatever.
way he doesn't get inducted. But
Come on,
yeah, I
come
mean,
on.
it's yeah,
When
yeah.
when he does, Arrow Hawani will be there in the UFC Hall of Fame together.
Oh
Like they'll
man,
induct each other in.
never, never,
Never. But
never.
but yeah, like you can do legendary things, but becoming a legend, it's another level, I think, you know, and there's another level is becoming an icon, right? Like Conor McGregor, he'll never be a legend, but he's an icon of the sport.
Yeah,
I think these are different things, right? And people like to throw around these terms and label people these things. And sometimes you gotta sit back and say, okay, really, are they a legend? Like Snoop Dogg is, you know, if you followed hip hop or rap music for the past 30 years, that guy is an icon of rap music, right? Like he's probably the most famous rapper of all time, right? Like he's been everywhere. Like, and who doesn't, he's like Michael Jordan in a way. Who doesn't know Michael Jordan? Who doesn't know Snoop Dogg, right? Nowadays, like people really don't know Michael Jordan because sports, like they kind of fades away, right? Like people
yeah,
forget, and they're focused on LeBron. They just know LeBron. But yeah, so like in fighting, like um like Fedor, he's a legend and he's an icon. Like he's both to me in my eyes, right? I guess it all depends on in your eyes what you feel it is, right? It's
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
it's like the
and
GOAT conversation as well, you know.
right, right. And one thing I will say for Miller though that I think is truly remarkable is if you look back, like every sport evolves, right? Like if you look back in the history of any sport, at the beginning, the guys that were putting up certain stats or certain things, like if they were to play in today's modern era during their prime, they'd probably struggle because like it's just natural, right? It's the same thing with the first time a guy ran a mile in like under 4 minutes was the first, like took forever, and then like the next 3 years, 20 people did it, right? Like it just naturally
PEDs.
happens. Yeah, well, but I mean,
HGH.
the point is, well, that would have been more prevalent in the old days. And I guess where I'm going with that is like Miller has evolved with the sport, right? He's still getting wins, like he's still fighting great wars, and he's like he's been there since UFC 100. I mean, to evolve that far is just remarkable to me. To where you're still competing at a high level against good prospects. Yeah, you're not fighting top 15 guys, but like you're still in the upper echelon of your division. And to evolve your game like that at his age, after all the stuff he's gone through, I mean, it's a pretty remarkable feat. But I
To
mean, we're
counter that
digressing.
though, the level of UFC fighter has dwindled down from the time Jim Miller was like at his peak. You know what I
I
mean?
see. I don't know about
You
that.
could, right? Maybe it balanced out. I don't know. Maybe
Maybe,
it
dude,
balanced
if you
out.
watch some of the old like lightweights and welterweight fights, dude, just look at the striking. Like it's like holy crap,
Yeah,
these
yeah.
guys are bad.
Hey,
Like-
Habib in his first like 5 fights in the
Oh,
UFC,
man.
like imagine if they would have thrown him in with somebody that had like really high level striking in his first 5 fights. I don't know exactly who he fought, but he looked terrible. Like on his feet, like he was throwing like uppercuts from his hip. You know what I mean? You know, if you
Yeah.
really dissect his striking, like there was a lot of points where he would have probably gotten knocked out by some of the guys. Like, because nowadays they're throwing you into the fire, right? Like they throw you in there. If you get 3 wins in a row and you have spectacular wins, like they're gonna put you against somebody really, really good. Back then, when Habib was first starting out, not so much. And
Yeah.
yeah, but whenever you talk about Habib, people go nuts. They go crazy. Habib, Islam, anybody from that camp, if you critique them, they go crazy. Yeah, Jim Miller, man, he's gonna continue fighting, and I'm gonna continue watching. I respect him so much for what he's done, and I love him, man. I think that he is like one of the gems. He's out there. He says what he feels. You know, he doesn't like. He's a company man, right? And if you're
Oh
a
yeah.
company man and you're comfortable with it, and the company's compensating you well, continue doing your thing, man. I can't hate on you for that. Moving on, we got another uh topic of discussion is Maria Bueno Silva. I think she's a major threat in that division, man, at bantamweight, and nobody's really talking about her. Her submission game is next level. She might not have like the big name wins, but I think the people that she beat, they're very skilled, and she went in there and beat them at their strength. She submitted girls that are submission artists, and this one, Lena Landsberg, she's 40 years old. She's not the most skilled, and but she still went in there and got the finish. I do think that they should give her the Erin Blanchfield, treatment, and push her and have her fight somebody that is in the top 5 or top 10 that has a couple of losses, and see how she does. What do you think of Silva?
No, I mean, I like that too. I agree that, like, I mean, her opponents again haven't been the most name recognition opponents, but she's looked great. In this one, I thought her striking was very improved, and that's what Landsberg was known for, right? Like elbow queen is, and she was eating those elbows and throwing her own. I mean, it's not as impressive as Blanchfield's win, but at the same time, yeah, you have another division where I'm sure they'll end up doing a Aldana versus Nunes, or a trilogy with Pena or something of that nature, and Rocky Pennington's right back up there too. Like, you've got a couple of options there, but otherwise that division is, I would say arguably, but I don't think it's that arguable, that it's the shallowest division on the women's side right now. And bantamweight, it just has very few people in it. And so why not give her a fight against, Holly Holm, or, Rocky Pennington, or Aldana, or whoever's not fighting Nunes, and let her get pushed? Because, I mean, Nunes has already cleaned out most of the division. Depending on where they want to go with Aldana or Pena or whoever, you could do that fight, but then have Bueno Silva be next one up if she can get past one more person. Like, I can't think of another bantamweight off of the top of my head where it would make sense to put them in that conversation. Like, I literally cannot think of a single bantamweight who would be like, oh, you should put this person in there. Like, I can't. Like, Silva's the only one.
Aldana is probably someone that the UFC wants to put in there for the title, just like, Grasso, the whole Central America thing, and they want to push that region. That makes sense. I don't hate it. I think it's time for her, man. Like you said, she's cleaned out the division. She's probably beaten everybody. And Aldana is the only one that hasn't fought, and I think she's coming off some good wins as well. I don't know exactly who she beat, but she's beaten some top competition. Yeah, why wouldn't they? Silva, they should push her. We'll see, man. We'll see, because even Silva, she's working on her English as well. These Brazilians, man, they pick up English pretty quick. If you noticed, like the best example is Junior Dos Santos. When he entered the UFC, he didn't speak a lick of English. By the time he left, the guy was doing like full podcasts, and like, the dude was very, very good at English. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of Brazilians that really, you got to respect their dedication to learning the English language. And there's some guys that don't really care, like Jose Aldo. Like, Jose Aldo was just like, I don't give a shit. Like, I'm Jose Aldo. Yeah. Like, I'm the king of Rio. Like, I don't need to know any of that. But yeah, nowadays you see a lot of foreign fighters. At the end of the day, the UFC is an American company. It's a North American company. It's an English-speaking company. You know what I mean? And English is the business language. And if you want to kind of excel and get more attention, you speak English. Press conferences, when you go to press conferences, they're speaking English. The media is asking questions in English. Like, it's just part of the game. If you want to like play the game better, you just got to do it, man. And even if it's not the best, even if you try, people respect that. And sometimes it comes out really well. Like Khabib, like when he started to speak English, like it came out different from anybody else, and he created his own brand of trash talking as well. It's like, send a location, like stuff like that. Like, he's had like very good like sound bites from his interviews, and I respect it, man, when fighters do that. But Silva, look out for her. I think this is the year where she breaks out. If she has like 2 more fights, I think she's going to be in the conversation with Aldana and Pennington and all those other fighters. It's hard to push for a rematch with Pennington, man, because she gave up in that fight. You know what I mean? Like, are you gonna put that in the highlight, the sizzle? Like, she gave up in the fight?
Yeah, and I mean it's hard from a business perspective because she was literally the like that pay-per-view I think was the lowest selling pay-per-view
of all
like
time, even
I,
lower than Mighty Mouse.
it's yeah, no, I mean it was 85K or 70K.
That's
Like so it was sub
crazy.
100,000, which is
That's
nuts.
crazy.
Yeah.
Hey,
No, it was
and
bad.
that's why the UFC doesn't want numbers getting out there anymore, because it doesn't really matter anymore for them. They don't have to
Right.
advertise
Oh,
that the
yeah,
numbers like
they don't care anymore. They don't want like I mean, they want higher numbers, of course, but like they finally have fixed revenue instead of
yeah.
that variable. Like at the time, that type of variable stuff hurts you. It's like, holy crap, that's bad. Like and when you're relying on that as a huge part of your revenue stream, like yeah, you're never getting a title shot again.
No.
But at least
And
not well, let me phrase that. Never getting a main event title shot again, but
yeah.
still, yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, whenever Dana White does an interview and and he talks about pay-per-views before the pay-per-view actually happened, he's just like, yeah, it's trending to become like the largest pay-per-view, or it's gonna crack this record or some record. And I'm pretty sure it's cracking a record somewhere, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, so one of the
somewhere.
records, sure,
Yeah, he's
but
not lying. It's just is it cracking the records that really
I mean, he
are
might also
important?
be lying. Let's be honest. He might
Yeah, that's
he
true too.
might be,
Promoters, that's part of like your job, is to lie, to exaggerate, let's say.
yeah.
Exaggerate,
Yeah.
exaggerate everything,
Yeah.
because we've seen the best of them, right? We've seen the best of them. Now, yeah, let's stay with Dana White. We're gonna talk about Dana White, and then we're gonna move on to the conflict of interest in fighting, and then we'll wrap shit up, right? Dana White, man, he wasn't in Australia for the biggest pay-per-view in Australian history, the biggest fight, pound for pound, number one, number two, lightweight division. That's the division. That's the money making division. That's the hardest division in all of sports or all of fighting. He wasn't even there for that. Is Dana White, or does Dana White really care about the UFC anymore, or is he just fulfilling his contractual duties, and he's really kind of slowly positioning himself to leave the UFC and make money elsewhere with like Power Slap League and Fuck It Friday, and even like people are not talking about it, but Zuffa Boxing? I think Zuffa Boxing is something's going on behind the scenes that they don't want people to know. What do you think?
I think well, so for Zuffa Boxing, I think that's dead. Like he's kind of insinuated it has been the last couple times he's been asked about it, where he makes it sound like maybe
But
we're
he's a
revisiting.
liar.
Yeah. Yeah, but like, I mean, the problem is his model, right? What he wanted to do for Zuffa Boxing is impossible because of the Ali Act. Like it literally prevents it. And so you can't take the UFC's model and put it in boxing. It's basically prevented by that law. And that law is not getting repealed anytime soon. Maybe he thought he could kind of get away with it when, his buddy was president of the US, and like maybe they could find ways around the regulations, but that never happened. And so at this point, I think Zuffa Boxing is just dead in the water. I think that's part of why he's trying to do something like Power Slap League and some of this other stuff. And in terms of him being like contractual obligations, this is something I've seen a lot in my consulting experience, right? Is when a company is, especially since I've worked a lot with startups, when a company is in startup mode and they're working all the time and they're like in huge growth, which is what happened to the UFC, right? Just this explosion of growth, both revenue wise, but then also popularity. When you're in growth mode, you are trying to reach the top of the mountain, and it's doing everything you can, finding new ways to reach the top. It's this excitement. It's that there's the goal, is the summit. And UFC got there. Just plain and simple, between being bought for, $4 billion, then negotiating a ridiculous media rights deal with ESPN, all this stuff, they've reached the top. And now they're past the startup growth stage and they're in the maturity stage of a company. And when you're in maturity stage, it gets old fast for a lot of these guys. A lot of these vision guys that like want to do everything and big and huge, it gets old fast because you can't do anything you haven't already done before, right? Like what is Dana's next mountain to conquer in the UFC? They've already been bought for billions of dollars. They have a crazy media rights deal. They've put on some of the craziest fights. They figured out the pandemic stuff to be the first sport back during the pandemic. and have Fight Island. Yes, there's a couple of smaller mountains, but at this point, he's probably just like, well, I'm a little tired of it. I've got new bosses now with Area Manual and Endeavor. Like, those are my bosses, right? And all of that. I'm going to go out and do my side ventures. And I'm sure he still likes the UFC, he still has passion for it, but he wants to focus on that new growth thing. Slap League is definitely his new, like, I want to grow this to be the biggest thing possible. You could tell by the way he talks about it. You could tell the fact that people were saying it was bad. And then he literally went through every Instagram comment and was like, this is fake. Account is fake. Like, you could tell how much he cares about that shit. He's looking for his next, white whale, right? Like, it's that nonstop chase. I think Dana's hit that point. And will he retire from the UFC? I don't know. If Slap League or fucking Friday or anything like takes off, maybe, but otherwise I don't see it happening anytime soon. But it's not the same as when it was like him and the Fertitas, right? It's just a different.
Well, you
different
see
vibe.
that already. You see that already. Like his face is dwindling away from the appearances that need to be made, right? He's only there when he really is needed for the UFC. And he, like,
it's
Hunter.
Joe Rogan. It's exactly what Joe Rogan did. It's right. Like, was there for every broadcast. Yeah. Now he only comes back for the fights that he wants to call. Like, I mean, he's off doing his own podcast and all that other stuff. It's same thing with Dana, I think.
Well, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about Andrade being the champion and going to China and fighting Zhang Weili in China for the title. And guess who was there for that event? And that was a fight night. Yeah. A fight night. Not even a pay-per-view. Guess who was there? Doing media. And most likely, like you said, meeting, like signing that big contract, that TV deal. He was probably in the conference room because his face, he needed to be there. He needed to negotiate. And those are the spots where Dana White needs to be. And I think from now moving on, you're going to see more of Hunter traveling the world. And they have regional reps, right? Like, there's one for Asia, there's one for Australia. Those guys are going to be coming out a little bit more into the forefront. Hunter will be there kind of behind the scenes, overseeing things more. And you hear his name coming out a lot more with the fighters as well, like him dealing with the fighters and negotiating and whatnot. Yeah, I think Dana White, he's in Korea. There's a term called Pajisajang. And what that means is, like, you're just the face. You don't really control anything anymore. You just say what needs to be said, and you just move the pieces where they need to be moved. But really, you're not the guy anymore. And I think that's what's happening with Dana White. He's just like, yeah, I'll just go with the flow. You're paying me this amount of millions a year to say this and that and do this media obligation and I go home and I don't have to deal with all the other bullshit. Hunter can deal with that. You know what I mean? The matchmakers can deal with that. We have meetings on like once a week and we talk about shit, and I film my little social media ads for the UFC, right? If you don't know, now you know, right? That bullshit. But yeah, like I see that in Dana White, right? And I see that and do I want Dana White to leave his position? I really don't care, because, like, to me, if the UFC has Dana White or not, I'm still gonna watch the UFC. Right. It doesn't matter with Dana White. It doesn't. Like, to me, it's to the point. It's like, if he's there, he's there. If he's not, he's not. Who cares? You know, I think people put too much stock into it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, because he essentially, he's president of the UFC, right? And this is what happens a lot with presidents or chairmen of a particular division. Like, you know, the I won't go too much into it, but Disney just had a huge activist investor fight going on between this guy who wanted to, like, see more cost cutting, and then the chairman of Marvel, who you've never heard of, some guy you've never heard of, who really just doesn't do much with it, but he's like the chairman, right? He's like part of the face, he's part of and he's a large shareholder, so they keep him around. Like, Dana is much more face of everything, like you're saying, than he probably is doing behind the scenes. Like, Hunter has been dealing with the fighters for a long time now, and matchmaking, right? He's got Sean and Mick. Like, I feel like Dana does certain obligations, like you talk about, and that's and things he wants to deal with, and then otherwise, Yeah, he's got Contender Series. He's got Slap Fight. Like, these are his pet projects he wants to be a part of. But the interesting thing as to why they keep extending him and why they want to bring him around is because you and I are going to watch the UFC no matter what, right? That's just going to happen. But the casual fan, right? They want to have a consistent face and brand that is part of that. And I mean, it's not a big shock that like he did the he spoke at the Republican National Convention twice when Trump was running for president. He has been a face of multiple things. They tried to, before his domestic violence stuff, it was Dana White's Power Slap League, just like it's Dana White's Contender Series. He is a known brand face that they want to keep because they're worried if he goes away, right, who replaces him, and could it affect the casual viewer? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But it gets into a Vince McMahon BS with wrestling, right? Like, everyone was so afraid that if Vince McMahon leaves, there was a whole side note in their filings, the WWE's filings, is that when Vince McMahon retires, it's a huge risk to the share price. And he went away, and it's been fine. Like, it's just, companies get latched onto that idea that this person is so important and so consistent, we can't move them, and they don't want to rock the boat. And Endeavor doesn't, like, right now while interest rates are rising, right? If interest rates were going down again, they might be more willing to try it, but they have so much debt they have to pay off. They don't want to lose any amount of money.
Yeah, and everybody's about chasing the clout, and Dana White has a lot of clout. You know what I mean? That's what it's about. And you got the Nelk boys, and you got all these like social media personalities, Jake Paul, and him feuding with Jake Paul. Dana White probably doesn't really even care about it, but he just does it because it draws attention to the UFC. And then he goes and does a deal with Logan Paul and his drink brand, and now they got the Prime deal with them and KSI, and these are all like different demographics pulled in, I think, really because of Dana White. It's, yes, the UFC, but Dana White is the one that's making the phone calls and bringing these guys in and getting the best deals. Because I think that's one thing Dana White's good at, is getting the best deals. And there's nobody in the UFC that can do that for him. Nobody.
Maybe. I mean, that's the thing. I don't know how much he's actually involved in some of these deals, right? Like, if you go back to what we know from the antitrust lawsuit, like, and they talk about some of the fighter negotiations for pay between managers and the UFC, it was Joe Silva doing most of the negotiations. Like, Dana was there for like some of the bigger ones, but like Joe Silva was the one actually saying like, let's do this, whatever. And the Fertittas were the ones negotiating. Like, when they talk about Conor not going to UFC 200 and all this stuff, Fertittas were the ones that were like really trying to push certain things. I don't know Dana's level of involvement. Maybe he is really in there and doing all of that, but like you said, he might be what we'd call like a customer relationship manager, right? Like, he's the face and he's the guy that's like going to like talk to you and make sure you're on the same page and talk about the ideas and all this stuff. But then when it comes down to the actual nitty gritty, I don't know that Dana sits there and he's like, hey, we can only give you 3% and all that. Like, I don't think that's it. I think that's probably Hunter and then a couple other people. Maybe it is him to an extent, but I think he gets told those numbers too, right? I think he's the face of the negotiations. He doesn't strike me as a guy that
get them in the door, get them in the conference room. Dana White can do that, right? And I think there's nobody in the UFC that's able to do that for them. And I feel like that's his job, or that's what he's good at, and that's what they want to use him for. Because at the end of the day, he's an employee, right? You know what I mean? He's an employee, so they got to use his strengths. And then he also gets time to work on his side projects and make tons of money. And one thing about people, you don't just get rich and decide, oh, I'm just going to retire. That doesn't happen to everybody. And most people don't do that. They get rich and they continue working. Like, there's no stopping. Like, you're working on something, right? It's not just to become more rich, but you're working on something. You just don't stop and say, oh, I'm just going to stay at home every day and wake up. Like, if you look at things of like people in the past that have done that, they end up dying like real quick because there's no purpose. You know what I mean? Once you get to a certain age, and even that health thing, that Dana White's promoting nowadays, like you found out later that he's part
steroids,
like investor. He's part investor in that thing, right? And there's people poking holes in that system as well. But since he's part investor, of course he's going to pump that and use the platform. He has such a huge platform that he could pump his side projects on. It's insane. Like anything that he does, he could pump his man. Dana White, he's a powerful man, powerful man. And man, there's levels of his like his hustle you gotta respect so much, because he came from like basically a cardio kickboxing instructor to what he is now in a 20-something year span. And it's just like, he's a unicorn in that business.
Yes.
Basically, he's a unicorn in that business. He's a walking unicorn.
Yeah, no, you got to respect his hustle and his business savvy to get to where he's been, right? Like, I mean, if you even, man, 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, imagine somebody saying like, hey, Dana White's going to have a power slap league on TBS and TNT. Like, are you kidding me? There's no way. But yeah, I mean, he's come a long way, especially for where he started. And you got to respect it from a business perspective. Yeah, you got to respect it for sure.
All right, let's move on to the next topic. Conflict of interest in fighting. Does it exist? I'm going to let you give a little bit of spiel on that, and then I'm going to bring up some articles. There's 2 articles that I have, and then we'll talk about those articles. But does it exist, Pat?
Oh, yeah. Yes. It's rampant in MMA. I mean, the fact that the James Krause stuff like is what required the UFC to update their code of conduct policy that, by the way, they rarely follow, right? Like a policy that's kind of like semi-hollow, but it's in your contract, is wild. It's wild to me. There is a conflict of interest at almost every step of the way, from media to managers to agents to fighters to promoters. There is conflict of interest everywhere. There are very few things that don't have some at least minor conflict of interest in them when it comes to MMA. I am hard pressed to think of certain deals, like maybe Bryce Mitchell's like car sponsorship, right, where he talked like his car dealer or something. Like, sure, okay, that's fine. But like it's like beyond stuff like that. You know, Ryan Bader doing his Arizona thing, or when he was like the mascot, he was dancing. Like, yeah, sure, a couple of things like that. But like, it is so hard to not find a conflict of interest in MMA when it comes to the business side of things. It's bonkers, man. Media too, right? It's insane.
Well, something that you're probably much more educated about than me is the WWE. Like, I don't watch wrestling. The last time I watched wrestling was like in the 1990s, early 90s. I went to a live show. This was when it was WWF. I sat front row. I had front row seats in the early 90s. And I remember Razor Ramon was one of the guys that were there. And then that's when I stopped watching wrestling, because I saw that it was fake, because I was in the front row, and these guys, you just noticed that this shit is fake. What the hell's going on? I thought it was real. You know what I mean? Like, I was a kid. I thought it was real. And and after that, I stopped watching it, right? But yeah, let's put this on the screen and we'll go through it. Let's see what we got here. Oh, you see it? All right. So Ariel Helwani's in the news, right? He's being blasted as being unethical for WWE SmackDown appearance. I'm pretty sure you saw this, Pat, over the weekend. And, you know, people are attacking Ariel for this. They're calling him unethical because he was appearing on camera with a WWE branded mic, and he was acting as a roving reporter covering the sport. But at the same time, he's covering the sport of wrestling, pro wrestling, for other outlets. And then on top of that, Tony Khan, I don't know who, like, I guess Tony Khan's a powerful person, and he's calling Ariel Helwani a fraud and not a and
he's the head of AEW, which is like not a real rival to WWE, but now the second biggest wrestling promotion. Like that's who Tony is he's basically the closest thing, like similar to what like Bellator would be to UFC, right? Okay. Like that's what so Scott Coker. Imagine Scott Coker calling out Ariel for doing something with the UFC while he's supposed to be working for MMA fighting, right? Like that's probably the best metaphor I could come up with.
So, what do you think of this situation right here? Are they? Is it right to call him unethical for doing this? Because I think he's done this before in the past, even with the UFC. Right? He was working for Fox, or was he working for the
Yeah,
UFC?
he worked for Fox at one point, and then for ESPN, right? Yeah, no, I mean, like the short answer is yes. There's a conflict of interest, and yes, it's unethical as a journalist, right? Like, it's weird because we talk about how media is MMA media specifically. A lot of people don't call themselves journalists. They're like, nope, not a journalist. I don't like. It's like, okay, yeah, that's fine, but like this is definitely a scenario where Ariel paints himself as being an unbiased journalist, right? And like you can't do that and then say you're unbiased between multiple companies and then go on the like biggest company show, be like there as a roving reporter, do voiceovers for them, like not ask them any hardball questions, which he didn't, right? In the post, I didn't see the post event press conference for the event they just had, but like one guy who's known for the business side of WWE stuff, Brandon Thurston, asked about the WWE sale. Like Ariel Helwani asked like very softball BS questions, which is normally what Ariel Helwani doesn't do, right? Ariel usually pushes pretty bad. Like, yeah, it's 100% like unethical if you're calling yourself a journalist and if you're saying you're unbiased. Like that's you can't say that and then go, and that's the equivalent of me, right, saying that, hey, I'm going to interview and cover the business side of all of the major promotions in MMA, but I'm also going to sit cage side in Dana White's personal box and never ask him about any of the fighter pay questions, right? But I ask Coker and I ask Don Davis and I ask Chaudhry all about fighter pay and all this other stuff. But I just like that's what Ariel did here. He's not unbiased. He's definitely unethical if you're a journalist.
So basically, he's using his powers for evil in a way. You know what I mean? Because when you look at him in the landscape of fighting, you know, the fighting sports, blood sport, and I guess pro wrestling is somehow weirdly tied into this. You know what I mean? In even though it's fake, you know what I mean? But it has like aspects of fighting, and fighting has aspects of pro wrestling, right? It's kind of intertwined. What do you think of that? Is it intertwined?
It's so the weirdest thing about it to me is it's not intertwined from a fan perspective. Like there is like I think a 5% overlap. There's somebody did a study on it. It's like 5 or 10%, something like that. But from a fan perspective, there's not that much overlap. But Dana White took WWE's business model and put it through MMA. Like that's the thing. From a business aspect, it is nearly identical. Like that was part of the reason the UFC got as much power as they did. They were able to lock people into these crazy contracts. Like he basically took Vince McMahon's playbook and then put it towards fighting. So in that regard, they're extremely intertwined. But in terms of like actual, you know, what's going on in wrestling world versus MMA world, like there's very little overlap. You get some fighters that go through both, right? But like, and they kind of play it up in the wrestling side, right? But Brock Lesnar fought Bobby Lashley last night at the event or whatever, and they both played up the MMA backgrounds of both, right? For Lesnar in the UFC and Lashley in Bellator, but it's not, you know, it's not an actual like real overlay there.
Errol Helwani, he is the 10-time winner of Journalist of the Year, and to me, that's, you know, it is what it is. You know, he won the award and he's proud of it, and good for him. You know what I mean? I respect him a lot. You know what I mean? He's been covering the sport of MMA. I'm not even talking about wrestling, of MMA for a long time. And he's built his brand off going into fighters' faces and asking them the hardball questions, right? Like he's built his brand off of that. Like remember his face-to-face with Rampage, even Nick Diaz back in the day. Like that's what blew him up into becoming who he is, right? That's what drew all the attention, and he's created an empire around himself, right? Respect to that. Like, but journalism, man, like, it doesn't exist. I think I would have to put it out there. It doesn't exist. Ethical journalism, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's very rare in fighting.
Oh yeah. No, there are, I think I can count on maybe one hand the amount of like journalists I would pretty confidently say like, yes, this is an ethical journalist. And like, I mean, other like in MMA, like it's, or rather someone that has like never crossed an ethical boundary. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Right. Yeah, it's in MMA, it's almost impossible. Like Luke Thomas did a really great spiel on this a while back on, I think, a live chat where he talks about like, if you're trying to do ethical journalism in MMA, one, it's not super popular, so it doesn't get a lot of clicks, which is just, you know, the way the system works now. And then two, you're going to make a ton of enemies, and it's going to like make it that much harder for you to be popular. I feel like prior to him going to Morning Combat, right? Like, you know, Luke was one of the few bigger name ethical guys in that, like, he would call people out for things. He got blackballed a lot. I mean, I'm sure he crossed the line here or there too, right? If you go back and look at some of the stuff he did, but it's so hard. It is so hard to get ahead in the business without stepping over the boundaries. Honestly, anyone that works for ESPN, right? Like one year, I believe Brett Okamoto was up for Journalist of the Year. You cannot be a journalist if you are reporting for the broadcast partner of the sport you're nominated, of one of the biggest promoters of the sport you're nominated for. Especially when you have Jeff Wagenheim coming out and saying like they don't want us to really paint or talk about Dana White's domestic violence. Of course, ESPN doesn't want that. It's an inherent. ESPN has an inherent conflict of interest because you're paying the UFC an ungodly sum of money to host your pay-per-views. Like, so of course you can, anything that any of your writers write about is going to at least have some tinge of like, well, you could talk about this, this, and this, but probably shouldn't talk about that. So it's MMA, man. There are very few MMA journalists.
Well, Helwani, man, he's built a brand off like starting wars. Not starting wars, but I guess people starting wars against him and him reacting,
right? Stirring up shit. Yeah, he stirs stirring up
shit, you know, and him, he has a lot of power in this industry, man. A lot of power. All the fighters, they want to get on his show. You know what I mean? And not all of them, but there's a large percentage of fighters that's like, when am I going to get on the Ariel Helwani show and get interviewed by Ariel Helwani? You know what I mean? And he does go at fighters, right? I remember most recently the whole Jamal Hill thing. You know what I mean? Like Dana White, he doesn't like Dana White. So like, of course, Jamal Hill said something, responded to somebody on Twitter, and then Ariel tried to use that to get something out of Jamal Hill. And Jamal Hill just recently won the title. You know what I mean? Like if you wanted to focus on Jamal Hill, like you would focus on that, but he didn't. And then they had a little back and forth. But Ariel holds so much power, right? Like it's very rare where you see a fighter go on the show and attack Ariel, right? It's not. When is the last time that has happened, right? You just see it from afar. Like we saw Patty do it, you know what I mean? Because but Ariel has so much power and he has a huge fan base to where people turned on Patty for this same situation. But then Ariel brought out evidence, right? I don't understand why he's keeping phone conversations or messages.
Probably for this type of situation.
I guess so, man. It's pretty insane, like how that turned into what it turned into. But yeah, like this whole situation, if Ariel's doing it, let's just put it out there. If Ariel's doing it, then you should be doing it.
Depends on what you want. But yeah, I mean, again, you got to respect what Ariel has done, building his brand, doing all this for sure. As long as he doesn't call himself a journalist, I have no issue with it. He does. And that's part of the issue is like, well, you're not really a journalist though. And they made fun of it a little bit. Yeah,
I'm not. So the thing is like, people are afraid to like talk about this and to kind of,
Right.
you know, pick and, and nitpick at Ariel. And to me, I'm not afraid of that because it doesn't impact me. You know what I mean? A lot of people's dream as like a up and coming journalist or a writer or whatever is to go work for like these big publications, right? And then maybe if you
Yeah.
do go at Ariel, you shut the door on like one publication, which is MMA fighting, or even Vox. You know what I mean? Vox is the one
Right.
that kind of controls like MMA fighting, SB Nation, I believe so. And what's another company? MMA Mania, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
Bloody Elbow, but Bloody Elbow, I guess, is not going to exist
It's gonna
anymore.
be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which sucks. And a shout out to everybody that worked at Bloody Elbow. You
Yeah.
guys did phenomenal work.
Well, they're gonna try and keep it going like independently. So
I
I
hope
mean,
so.
support them. Yeah, support them if you can. But yeah, I mean, like it's yeah, exactly. It's and Ariel is even less so a problem than like that's why it pretty much what makes it a prerequisite to not be a journalist in MMA is you can't go too hard at the UFC, right? Like that's the like that same type of stuff where you're talking about like, well, if you piss off Ariel, it might close the door on certain things. Like, if you go too hard at the UFC, you'll get closed. The
Yeah,
door will be shut. And if that happens, then you're screwed, right? Like if you can't go to events, if you can't talk to fighters, like that was a huge problem Luke Thomas talked about all the time. He would have the same like 8 fighters on his radio show on Sirius XM, and like they would ask him like, why do you only interview like those? But it's like, man, we ask a ton of people, and like we
mhm,
basically get shut down by certain managers and certain promotions. It is what it is. Like that's just part of the prerequisite for MMA media is if you're going to try and like make it big, you have to be very careful about how you want to be ethical and yet, not piss off the UFC to the point where they ban you from events because
yeah.
they'll do that. Like, like it's
Well, you got to pick your pathway, and you
yeah,
see certain guys pick a pathway of getting jobs, or just the type of like journalism, so-called journalism that they do. And to me, like, I'm not a journalist, so I don't really give a shit. Like, but if you're calling yourself a journalist, you're calling yourself this or that, or you're covering shows, and there's a level of responsibility that you have, right, to the
yeah,
public, to the viewing public, that you have to live by, right? And if you're not living by it, and if Arrows Hawani is doing it, then you need to do it. Somebody clip that shit. If Arrow Hawani is doing it, you need to be doing it, because he's the biggest and the baddest, right? He's the one that
yeah,
everybody wants to have on their show. He's the one that's working for multiple outlets. And if you want to reach the top of the mountain, which probably will never happen, he's a unicorn. Like we talked about Dana White being a unicorn, Errol Hani is a unicorn in this industry.
yeah.
And most likely nobody's going to reach that level, right? It's going to be a very long time before somebody reaches that level.
I think someone eventually will, just because like Ariel will eventually get old, right? And like either stop or die. Like as terrible as that is to say, right? But like that's what happens. So somebody will fill that void. But yeah, it's gonna be a lot. Like I mean, he's gonna be on top until he either retires or dies. Like
Yeah.
that's where he's at.
That's just the truth. And
Yeah,
but is Ariel unethical? It's up to how you view it, right? Is there a conflict of interest? It's clear as fucking day.
yeah.
It's clear as fucking
It's
day.
right there. It's
And if you think there's a conflict of interest is what you're doing, and if Arrow's doing the same shit, you better be doing that shit. Because that's the shit that's gonna make you advance in this industry, motherfucker. Right? I'm
Journalist
just
professors are rolling over and they're just vomiting.
there is no journalist professor in this. There is none.
I mean,
Like,
yeah.
just
I
go
mean, at
do
this
it.
point,
Like,
yeah,
is like, because a lot of people, Arrow's their idol. Copy your idol. Go copy him. Do what he's doing, because it's gonna advance you. And if it doesn't advance you, and most likely it might not, because people are gonna look at you with a side eye, because you are not Ariel Hawani. You are not this guy, right? Um, I'm just saying,
yeah. No,
just
I mean,
follow
yeah.
him.
Yeah. Depends on what you want, right? Like,
Yeah,
I try to be I try to be as journalistic as I can be. I don't know if I could
yeah,
qualify as calling myself a journalist, but I also like I cover one area. I'm not trying
mhm,
to be Ariel. I'm not trying to do this full time, right? Like I cover I follow the John Nash method of like,
Yeah.
hey, let's talk about this cool, interesting stuff, and who cares if like we get banned from stuff because like whatever, like, and that's I'm happy with that. So you can follow that route too, but yeah, don't follow this route and think you're gonna get like tons of money or a full-time job because
Nah,
that's not gonna happen.
no,
Yeah.
there's a 5%.
I don't know if it's more than 5 or not. I don't know where John went. Apparently, the UFC heard what was going on. So yeah. So and I also can't see comments. So if you're commenting right now, I will let you know if I see them. But with that in mind, I guess we'll wait for John to come back. Let me see if I can pull up comments in a different way. Might be able to pull this off. This is a good time to remind you that if you haven't already, download the app in the bottom of. Oh, there he is. Okay,
There we go. There we go. There we go.
I was doing a pitch. I was saying, I was conflict of interest.
Right.
I was doing. This is a good time to remind you to download the app.
All right. There's one more thing, Pat. I appreciate you, man, coming on the show, man. Pat is so good at what he does, and I could always talk to you about these types of topics because we could get into it. Because I'm not a journalist. That's what's great about it. Like I don't have to suck dicks, right? Like I don't have to do that, right? There's no dick sucking, right, for me. So there's one more thing we want to put up here, which is very similar to what we are just talking about. And here we go. Let me put this up there. Okay, here we go. All right, so this one is about Dean Thomas, right? Dean Thomas, which is a very well-respected guy in this industry. Mm-hmm. He is part of the Association of Boxing Commission and Combative Sports Athletes Voice Committee, right? So what this Athletes Voice Committee is created for is for athletes to help athletes better connect with regulators, and it also allows athletes to express their concerns and give regulators opportunities to educate the fighters. Why is this a conflict of interest? Where I'm going to ask Pat if it is Dean Thomas works for the UFC and ESPN, and he's part of this committee at the same time. Is this a conflict of interest?
Yep, it is. And this is an example of it's far less than, say, like what Helwani was doing, right? Where Helwani is supposed to be reporting to on both of these companies or multiple companies and painting himself in that light. And then he's going on a company's broadcast and doing all of that. But I mean, yes, it is inherently a conflict of interest, right? You can't be on an independent committee that's supposed to advocate for fighters without you can't do that while you know, at least in the back of your mind, that your employers probably want certain decisions to be given from this committee, right? Like they want, if there's a vote up for something in particular, if there's something going on, you've got to, even if they're not talking directly to Dean Thomas, even if, nobody's even mentioned it to him from ESPN or UFC, he's got to know if the way he votes will probably come out, and he's got to at least have in the back of his head, like, well, if I vote for this and it passes, like UFC might be pissed. This won't be good for ESPN, UFC, and that will maybe influence him, maybe not, who knows? But just the fact that he has to think about that at some level makes it a conflict of interest. Like you can't, it's lesser, but it's still there, right? You can't be part of a major promotion and broadcast media partner and then say, oh, I'm going to be on this, what's supposed to be independent commission to help advocate for fighters. You can't do it. Like if you wanted to be truly independent, you'd have to resign from ESPN and UFC, which I don't think Dean is going to do.
Yeah, it's very interesting, man. Dean, he seems like such an intelligent guy, and he's clearly buddies with Dana White, right? They do that looking for a fight show together as well, and he's a hilarious dude. Like his acting is phenomenal, man. He's a great entertainer, but him being part of this and being employed by ESPN and basically the UFC. I don't know. Is he contracted by the UFC or is he contracted by ESPN? That's another thing. Is it the same thing?
I mean, it's different, but it's still the conflict of interest is there either way, right? Like, it's different, and I'm sure he's contracted through one, and I don't think the other. Maybe he has separate contracts, depending on lots of companies. If you're an independent contractor, as long as they you don't violate their conflict of interest issues, which I'm sure are in the contracts, they don't care, right? Or they'll make exceptions. In this scenario, it doesn't matter if it's ESPN or UFC. If Dean is working for one of them, there still has to be some bias, even if he doesn't realize there's bias, right? There's going to be some inherent conflict there in terms from an ethical standpoint. I would imagine almost every ethics professor would agree that's a conflict of interest to be on the committee and then also be employed by either ESPN or UFC.
Man, it's like, if you look at like the NBA, right? They have a players association, and players represent pretty much all the players, right? That's what happens in this, and then they go negotiate with the league and the owners. It's like having a guy that's working for, let's say, the NBA.com. There's a guy working for NBA.com, but he's also the representative for the player association. Is that kind of like the same thing?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, maybe a clear example is, you are supposedly a manager for MMA fighters, but then you're also working with promotions to do certain things, and right? Like, I mean, that's probably a truer comparison, just in terms of, you're supposed to be if you're an MMA manager, you're supposed to be advocating for the best possible deal for your fighter. And as we know from these new contract changes, some of the clauses in there are ridiculous. Like the arbitration clause I've seen before in certain things, but some of the other changes are like, whoa, you probably wouldn't want your fighter signing this. But then you have managers that want to keep the door open with the UFC and want to have a good relationship with them. And there you go. That's a huge conflict of interest. Same type of deal here. If you're going to say, even if you're working for ESPN, it's okay, my broadcast media partner my boss has poured a ton of money into this partnership, right? Like an insane amount of money into this partnership with the UFC. And now I'm supposed to vote on fighter rights or fighter rules that I'm sure could affect that partnership. Yeah, there's no way it's not a conflict. And there's no way, especially somebody like Dean, who's buddies with Dana, wouldn't be thinking at certain points like, oh, this would be really bad for the UFC, so I'm going to vote this way. Or, not that he would do that, but he's got to at least have that thought, right? And that's all it takes to cross the ethics line. I mean, ethics are tough, man. Ethics are not easy.
Man. And when you have power, it seems like it comes in, it's less of a factor in the moves that you make.
Yeah, I mean,
in a lot of ways.
Because inherently, there have been studies that have been done about this. You tend to get more power and more money if you're unethical. The most monetarily successful people or people in higher positions of power are almost all I forget what the statistic is, but it's something like an astounding amount of CEOs of companies are sociopaths. They'd have no conscious or ethical boundaries on it. That's just tend to how it works, is it's way easier to get ahead if you're unethical. So yeah,
it's man, there's a lot of, I'm not even gonna say the names, but there's a lot of promotions that are run by managers.
Yeah.
And those managers manage fighters that are fighting in that promotion, and then they manage them into the UFC. And then you gotta think there's a massive conflict of interest, and we've seen it happen clear as day in front of our eyes, of matchups happening to where that manager is the promoter and he's the matchmaker, and he's matchmaking to build up his guy that he's managing and then push him into the UFC. And then when the UFC comes, because a lot of the times UFC comes to managers and says, hey, who do you got?
Right.
Who's the hot prospect? And of course, the manager is going to push. I think even sometimes maybe the UFC comes into the promotion and says like, who's the hot prospect, and you're the manager of the guy that you're promoting in your promotion. Of course, you're going to push him before the other fighters, right? And give him favorable matchups, right? And then build his record up. And that's a massive, massive conflict of interest, man. Like, I feel really shitty for these fighters that are more honest and they're trying to like just build themselves up, but they just don't have the right manager, or they just don't have the right promoter, or whatnot. You know what I mean? It's happening all the time, clear as day, and we see it. And I wish the guys that have power, you know, like Ariel Helwani, put it out there a little bit more, because at the end of the day, me, I don't have that much power, and I'm not a journalist, but Ariel Helwani is 10-time journalist of the year. Come on. It's your responsibility. You're the Homelander of MMA media. In a way, right?
I guess in a way, yeah. I mean, that's true. If you look at like, and again, this is like part of the issue where if you look at like the fact that John Nash's topics are not covered by Ariel Moore, or like, and it's because they're not as popular. Like they're not as popular. It's not, and it's, you know, it is what it is. Like it's just kind of, it's how it goes, man. It's just how it goes, and it sucks. And this is just how it tends to be. But yeah, there are, I mean, Kareem Ziddane's work, right? Like another guy who's out there shining a light on a very important part of the sport, and it just isn't getting any love whatsoever from bigger name guys. It's because it's not popular. Yeah, it gets more hate. Yeah. It gets more hate. Oh yeah, and it's just like, well, this is, it's bonkers to me. It's bonkers to me that after so long, we've had so much time with the antitrust lawsuit with numbers that are published, like certified by a court of law. And you still have fighters being like, oh man, no, the UFC pays way more than that. Or the UFC pays, it's like, this is literally their documents talking about how they were going to cap fighter pay at 20%, like no matter what. That was part of their whole pitch to somebody buying them. And then we know that, like, we know that Brock Lesnar was the highest paid athlete up until 2016. It's been, again, certified in multiple lawsuits. And people are like, oh no, I mean, John Jones must have made like 10, 15, 20 million. Like, no, man. Like, it's literally like, but people just don't know about it. Or if they do, they just balk at it because it's not coming from Ariel Helwani or from a big name, right? Like if Ariel Helwani goes on and is like, hey, by the way, fighter pay is terrible. Here's all this stuff. I guarantee a lot more people jump on it. But
if Ariel Helwani on his show, his platform, right? And I would love to see this maybe happen in the future, is have a weekly segment with someone like a John Nash, like even for like 20 minutes every week on his show to discuss like what's happening in MMA. And I think it would educate a lot of fans, and it would educate me, you know what I mean? Because I don't know everything. And then on top of that, it would open a lot of eyes to what's going on. And I think I think people would support the fighters a lot more. You know what I mean?
And it's tough too, because you have another huge problem is you have a ton of people out there spreading misinformation, some being just complete stupidity, others being like true, you know, malfeasance of like the salaries. I forget there's a certain Twitter account, I forget his name, who posts these salaries every time. And it's like, these are not anywhere remotely true. Or pay-per-view buys. It's like, no, man, we know one pay-per-view buy from 2012, exactly one. And that is that Oliveira versus Gaethje. Pretty sure that's the one it was. It's either Oliveira versus Gaethje or Oliveira versus Bakacin, but I'm pretty sure it's Gaethje. Did 400K or around 400K. And that it was the top selling pay-per-view up until that time. So through May, we know that no pay-per-view did better than 400K. Like that's the only thing we know. We don't know anything about like June and after any of that. We know nothing else. People will die in the comments being like, well, they did, you know, Adesanya versus Whitaker 2 did like 2 million buys. It's like, what are you talking about? Where are you just making stuff up? And it's tough. There was again, won't say it specifically, but there was a YouTube guy who kind of blew up talking about some of the betting stuff with Krause and some of the other inferences, and some of his points were spot on and made sense. Others made no sense at all and were refutable. And when I tried to talk to him about it, I was left with a like, oh, I'll send you the timestamps where I refute this, and that he never did. And like, it's like, oh, okay, that's not a thing that was there. But you know, it is what it is.
Well, shout out to MMA on Point as well. Those guys are doing some incredible work. You know, I mean, they just recently did one about one championships. You know, weight policy thing that they had. I don't even know what to call it.
No, the hydration stuff. No, MMA on Point. Jason and those guys, like they've asked me for a couple of things. I don't think I've ever made it on a video, but I know they talk to Nash. They talk to people, like they do their research, and they do great stuff. I've liked that they've pivoted. They've used their like building of these top 10 lists to then
for good.
For good, to talk about good issues.
Yeah. Awesome. They've reached like a certain level, and then like, okay, we've squeezed the juice out of this, and we're still going to do it, but now we're going to use our audience and educate them. And they're really doing some great work. Shout outs to them. I wish Aaron would do the same. You know what I mean? Maybe he will. Maybe he can do a side project, but you know, like everybody else, he's busy doing all different types of things. You know what I mean? Like, people are always asking me, like, how come you don't interview this guy or this guy? And then there's so many factors that go into getting people on the show. I'm surprised of how many people want to talk to me on a weekly basis. You know what I mean? It's very surprising. You know, a lot of people think
not surprising, man. It's not surprising.
but yeah, man. It's a topic that we should always discuss, and hopefully, you know, I mean, the people that have the power to use their power for good will eventually, that will kind of like pivot them into it. And let's leave it at that, and let's go out with my guy Mike's MMA picks. A wise man once said, with great power comes great responsibility. We love that. Mike is a friend of the show and a positive guy and a great guy. And follow him on Twitter. Follow Pat all day Auger.
Thank you, sir. Yes, that is how you say it.
Remember, I butchered it. I was like, Auger. No,
everybody does the first time, man. You're fine.
All right, everybody. Yeah, Pat. He's gonna be on the show, man, this year from time to time. I love having him on because we always have great conversations. I think I have the best conversations with you, Pat. And we don't really know each other that well, but we know each other, and we've done a couple of shows. But I think we've always had the best conversations because I could ask you certain things, and your responses allow me to like have the fucking lightning bolts in my head, you know, shoot around and come up with stuff. So it's fun, man. Everybody go follow him. Everybody go in the descriptions, download the AllStar app. And we'll be back later this week with a pick show. We're going to have another good analyst on, and have some fun. Thank you so much. And go follow Pat and go watch his Fight Business podcast. It's very educational. He breaks down shit really well.